Hi guys, how y'all doing today? Alright, so thank you for coming out today here at Bass Pro Shops Tampa. My name is Captain Dylan Hubbard from Hubbard's Marina. You can put the extras here for me if you don't mind. Those are all the keep this coupon sign. So thank you all for coming out today. My name is Captain Dylan Hubbard from Hubbard's Marina. Hubbard's Marina is located inside Johns Pass, Madeira Beach. We do 5, 10, 12, 39, and 44-hour fishing trips. And we do a ton of private charters as well. So today we're here to talk a little bit about nearshore and offshore fishing. Tips, tricks, whatever you guys want to talk about. We're here to talk to you guys, hopefully make it a little bit more of a fishing conversation instead of a fishing seminar. So if you guys have a question, if you've always wanted to know something, if I'm talking about something and I don't really go into enough detail, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and let me know. Because I'd rather talk with you guys instead of talking at you. So if you do want to talk about something specific, please don't hesitate to let me know. First, we like to always kind of start these things out with what's happening now. Now, it's the middle of January here. January and February is a great time of year to get offshore and near shore a little bit too for blackfin tuna. Blackfin tuna bite really well in the months of January and February. The best blackfin tuna fishing I've seen is always starting around December, January. It runs until around April, May. The cooler months is definitely when the water temperatures are cooler is when we see more blackfin. The best trip on our public 39-hour trip, we had like 35 blackfin tuna caught in one trip on the new moon in February. But the new and full moons in the months of January and February is a great time for blackfin tuna. Also guys, this is a great time for hogfish. Hogfish start biting really well in November, December, and then they continue to bite well into April, May. So good time for hogfish. Normally for mangrove snapper is more of a warmer weather fish. They spawn from around May until September, and mangrove snapper become more prolific and more aggressive typically towards the summer. But for some reason right now, the mangrove snapper bite is just absolutely out of this world. We're catching large mangrove snapper closer to shore and in higher numbers this time of year than I've seen this time of year any time in my lifetime. So definitely a really, really crazy, unique bite of mangrove snapper right now. We caught a 3.2 pound, 24-inch mangrove snapper on a half-day party boat trip in 38 foot of water 2 days ago. So we're catching monster mangroves very close to shore in very shallow water. I don't fish inside the bay myself, but a lot of the captains inside the bay are seeing lots of mangrove snapper around the shipping channel as well. So right now is a great time to get near shore and even offshore for mangrove snapper. Also, a lot of people are like, can you keep grouper, can you not keep grouper? During January, all the grouper species are open except for gag grouper. Gag grouper are open June 1st through the end of December. So gag grouper are closed until June 1st, 2019. But we have red grouper available, we have scamp grouper available, and right now there's no depth limitations. Coming up February and March, we have what's called the 20-fathom closure. A lot of people are confused by the 20-fathom closure, so I want to cover it with you guys real quickly. What happens in January and February in federal waters is we have this 20-fathom closure. 20 fathoms, a fathom is 6 feet. So 20 fathoms is 120 foot. Don't worry, it took me a long time to figure out that math too. So 120 foot is that closure. Now, it's not just specifically 120 foot or greater. You can use that as a general rule of thumb if you're on your own personal boat and you don't know where that closure line is. But basically, the National Marine Fisheries drew this line in the Gulf of Mexico. And beyond that line, during February and March, you cannot keep any of the shallow water grouper complex. That includes red grouper, scamp grouper, that kind of stuff. However, if you're fishing inshore of that line, can keep grouper. So in February and March, we play the game. We'll fish outside that line at night for mangrove snapper, yellowtail snapper, all those snapper species. And then during the day, we'll dip inside of that closure line and catch plenty of the, hopefully plenty, of the red grouper and scamp grouper and other shallow water grouper complex. The deep water grouper complex, snowy grouper, yellow edge grouper, Warsaw's, those Kitty Mitchells, those big deep water grouper, they're open. They're always open. There is no season on those fish. So always a good time to get out deep drop fishing as well. So that's kind of what's going on right now. How many of you guys own your own boat of 25 foot or greater that go out there and do your own fishing offshore? All right. How many of you guys own your own boat less than 25 foot that you fish near shore on? A few of you, all right. How many of you guys fish on charter boats and party boats? All right, so we're gonna talk a little bit more focused on that near shore fishing, since that's what a lot of you guys are here to talk about. And then if you all wanna talk about something else, if you have a question, don't hesitate to raise your hand. And I'd rather talk about what you wanna talk about. So we'll start off with talking about hogfish. Hogfish is everybody's favorite. And hogfish right now is a great time to go get them, and it's only gonna be getting better and better. Hogfish is a wrasse. It is not a hog. A lot of people call hogfish hog-nosed snapper. Have you heard that before? Hog-nosed snapper is a very common term to refer to hogfish. However, they are not in the snapper species whatsoever. They're actually a wrasse. They actually tend to hang above the bottom. A lot of divers refute that and say, no, they're always on the bottom. Well, that's because you just go down into their home and they're hugging the bottom to protect themselves. 9 out of 10 times a hogfish is between 3 to 5 foot off the bottom, looking down at the bottom for crustaceans. So hogfish love to feed on crustaceans. Shrimp, fiddler crabs, rock shrimp. That's what we catch the most, that's what we use to catch most often, those hogfish. Shrimp being the most common. However, those hogfish are super leader shot. They're super unaggressive. Hogfish are some of the last fish to bite. Now what's really interesting is 15 years ago, if you would have asked me about hogfish at a fishing seminar, I would have been like, no one really catches those hook and line. 15, 20 years ago, no one really targeted hogfish. Nowadays, with these different closures offshore, there's been a big effort shift inshore. Also, there's been a big effort shift to lighter tackle. When I was a kid, if I used less than 50, 60 pound tests, the captains would come down and cut my line, saying, you're using too light tackle, kid. Nowadays, people commonly fish with 20, 30, 40 pound tests, even 50 pound tests. It's very common to fish with lighter tackle. Also, spinning rods. Spinning rods have become much more common offshore, and the technology has increased to where you have these super sensitive, super light spinning rods and reels that are very strong. So this rod and reel right here, I mean, you can feel the wind blow across the tip of that rod. I can feel a fly land on the tip of this rod. And that really increases your ability to catch those very leader-shy, unaggressive hogfish. So this big change in technology and effort has really increased the amount of people targeting hogfish near shore, and it's really increased the education on the subject. Now, hogfish really enjoy lighter tackle. Typically, if I'm going out targeting hogfish, this would be my go-to setup right here. Just a jig head, or there's 3 different types of rigs you can use. You can use a jig head like this, you can use a knocker rig, or you could use a ball jig. Ball jigs are really common. There's a couple different kinds of them out in the market, but the easiest method, the simplest method, the easiest way to feel the bite is definitely this jig head method. The reason why is the weight is right attached to that hook. So if something touches that hook, it's gonna move the weight. So the jig head method is definitely the easiest to start out targeting those hogfish. Now the ball jig method, some of the ball jigs would definitely be the kind of the second easiest, a little bit more technical if the bite was a little slower. The knocker rig is definitely the more difficult version if you're knocker rigging correctly. Some people will use a little bit heavier weight, and then you're not really knocker rigging once you're using a heavier weight. Knocker rigging, anybody unfamiliar with knocker rigging? All right, what a knocker rig is simply using a very light egg sinker, something like this, ½ ounce, ¼ ounce, 1/8 ounce, even 1/16 ounce egg sinker. And that egg sinker is made to freely float on your main line. And basically what a knocker rig would be is, instead of having this jig head on here, I would have simply a bare hook, and then I would have an egg sinker that travels all the way up and down this line. And the further that egg sinker gets away from your hook, the slower that bait descends to the bottom. So the idea behind a knocker rig is it very slowly descends your bait to bottom, very naturally. And generally you're going to catch that fish as your bait descends to bottom in the water column. Knocker rigging is most common when you've been chumming, or when those fish are chummed up off the bottom, or when the bite is slow, or when you're targeting hogfish. So typically when I would knocker rig offshore, if I'm fishing 100, 110, 120 foot of water, I would knocker rig in the summertime when the bite's slow during the midday. You go out there in the summertime and it's just flat calm. There's nothing going on. During the middle of the day, sometimes there's no wind. It's just slick calm, no wind, super scorching hot, and the bite just kind of dies from like 10 a.m. to like 2 p.m. And that's a great opportunity to knocker rig. That super light tackle, slowly floating down to the bottom. Those opportunistic fish that are real lazy in that hot water are going to crush that bait. And that's when you get an opportunity to catch them, offering them that bait through a knocker rig. Also when you've been chumming. For example, on our 39-hour trip, if we get anchored up on a big peak, we're nailing mangrove snapper, yellowtail snapper, some grouper. We stayed anchored up on this peak for 2, 3, 4 hours at a time. What will eventually happen is you got 15, 20, 30 people down there bottom fishing. When you catch a snapper or a grouper and you're reeling it up from the bottom, they're regurgitating bait because of the barrel trauma. Also, you're dropping baits and someone might not know what he's doing so well and that bait might come off the hook. There's a lot of different things. You might miss the fish and all of a sudden he's been able to pull your bait off the hook. There's a lot of different factors that can contribute to creating a chum line. You have a bunch of people offshore fishing for a great period of time in a specific location. You create what's called a chum line. And a lot of times those larger mangrove snapper, those larger American red snapper, those larger yellowtail snapper, they will come up off the bottom into that chum line. So that knocker rig enables you to present your bait to those larger snapper species that typically hang out on the top of the column of fish. For example, if you pull up on a spot and you see a big fish show above the ledge, typically those are mangrove snapper. And typically the largest mangrove snapper is going to be at the top or bottom of that water column. The bottom of the water column, there's a bunch of other fish too, so a little bit difficult to target them. At the top of that water column, it's a lot easier to target them. Definitely the knocker rig enables you to target those fish. As far as hogfish goes, the knocker rig's one method, this jig head method is another. Typically with this jig head, what we'll do with these jig heads is I like to either tear the tail off the shrimp, or tear the head off the shrimp, and rig this hook down through the body, just like if you were putting on a plastic worm on this jig head, and then just sending it down the bottom. Now most of the time with the jig head, it's going to be descending a little faster, so you're going to generally get bit on the bottom. The thing about the hogfish is sometimes that hogfish is just going to come up and smack that bait. Other times that hogfish is just going to come up and just barely peck at that bait. Other times you're not even going to feel it. He's just going to lay on top of it until all of a sudden you lift the rod tip and he's going to hit it. That's what makes hog fishing so challenging, is they never bite the same two ways back to back. You know, they're very inconsistent. Also, the hogfish are the last species to bite generally. Generally, when you get anchored up on a spot, everybody's getting bites, right? You go to your honey hole, you anchor up, you drop your baits down, generally there's some action, right? You guys are late, come on. So generally you get some action, and then generally as that smell gets going in the water, the action gets better and better and better, right? And that you kind of get this crescendo effect that everybody's catching fish, everything's going well, and then all of a sudden it kind of plateaus. All of a sudden the bite slows down, right? And then all of a sudden after it slows down, it starts really slowing down. And now it's like, all right, no one's getting bites. That is the time in which you want to start dropping down your hogfish rigs. Because generally the hogfish is going to be the last species to bite. Hogfish range, as far as from the beach all the way out to about 120, 140 foot of water. But the most common depth to target hogfish, where we catch them the most, is around 30 to about 70 foot of water. They like the hard bottom, flat hard bottom with some cracks and sea fans. They like the gravelly sand bottom as long as it's got some sea fans on it. They like rock piles, small ledges, some artificial reefs as well. But generally you're going to find them the most often around that sand pebbly hard bottom with sea fans on them, or you're going to find them around those smaller ledges. Those big ledges, they're going to hold too much fish. There's going to be too much action there for you to get your bait or your live shrimp down to those hogfish. Those artificial reefs, same thing. There's just so many fish there. It's very difficult to get your bait down to those hogfish. Those smaller ledge with a much smaller ecosystem on them, a lot less, more aggressive fish there, that's when you're going to have the most success with those hogfish. So my favorite hog fishing spots are typically little 1, 2, or 3 foot ledges. Now, a lot of times the porgies are kind of your telltale sign. You'll drop down, you'll start catching gray snapper, or what are called white grunts, those very common Key West grunts, all the same fish. You'll catch those the most commonly. You'll catch some other bait fish, squirrelfish, lizardfish, that kind of stuff, maybe some mangrove snapper. But generally, all of a sudden, you'll start catching porgies. Porgy here, porgy there, porgy there. Then you know those hogfish are getting ready to bite. For some reason, those porgies are kind of like a calling card. And then all of a sudden, you catch one hogfish. Once you catch that first hogfish, it's like someone flipped the light switch. Generally, you're going to catch at least a couple more. Hogfish live in harems. Lucky them, right? So hogfish, generally, you're going to have one male hogfish for every 5 to 7 female hogfish. And then it's the same because they're going to live in groups. So where you have one male hogfish, you're going to have at least 5 to 7 female hogfish. And if you catch a couple male hogfish, there's going to be probably another 2 dozen female hogfish there. And there's generally, they're in that area. A lot of times you can fish a ledge over here, you're not catching much, you never catch those hogfish. A half mile over here, there's hogfish there. And then those ledges around that will hold hogfish. They're very, very hit and miss. Sometimes you can get them in this specific area, and right next door in this specific area, you can't get a hogfish. So it really takes some practice, some search, and some hit and miss. And once you stumble upon that first hogfish, it's like someone turned the switch on in your head as well, and you really start to dial in on them. They're a very, very smart, very leader-shy, very unaggressive fish, and it takes a lot of practice. Now, if you're fishing your own boat, for those of you who raised their hand and said you have a boat 25 foot or less, where you fish on your own near shore. Also, for those of you who fishes your buddy's boat near shore, it's a little bit more difficult when you only got a couple lines in the water because, for example, on our party boat trip, when we go get anchored up on one of those small ledges or rock piles where we know there's hogfish, we can have everybody on the boat who has them drop down shrimp. You get 20, 30 people on the boat dropping down a shrimp, that shrimp smell gets in the water, and those hogfish will turn on a lot quicker. Generally, we'll have a lot more success as well. Now you still got to kind of wade through those fish that you aren't looking for, like those gray snapper, porgies, sea bass, mangrove snapper, lane snapper, which is all great bycatch you can throw in the cooler as well. But you got to kind of wade through those species. With 2 or 3 people on the boat or 4 people on the boat, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of wade through those species because you don't have as much hooks in the water. So you can use other methods like chumming, for example, to get through to those hogfish. What we use a lot of times is we have shrimp tanks at the marina, so we have a lot of shrimp die off. So we'll take a little bag of dead shrimp and we'll put them in a little bait bucket with some water, let it thaw out. And I'll take a pair of bait shears, which is just a fancy word for scissors, and I'll take these scissors and I'll chop up those I'll chop up those dead shrimp in the corner of the bucket until I got a nice mixture of small chunks of shrimp. And that small chunk of shrimp mixture, I just throw up current and I let that stuff drift down to the bottom. And that will help me when I've only got 4 or 5 clients in the boat. That'll help me feed those other species, get the smell going in the water, and turn on the hogfish more quickly. Also, if you don't have access to a bunch of dead shrimp, these super shrimp work really, really well. This is aquatic nutrition sport fishing chums. They make snapper up, they make yellowtail chum, they make a bunch of different chum products. They have them right over there. This stuff works very well. We use the chum drop offshore. We use a lot of the snapper up when we're fishing 60, 70 foot of water on our private charter boats. We use this product a lot when we're hog fishing. The reason why is this product is a very hard pellet. A lot of times when you're offshore fishing, someone will mix up a chum mixture and they're like, oh, I've got the best chum ever. Do you mind if I chum? And they throw it in the water and it's all powder or sand stuff and it floats away on the surface of the water. It's not going to hit the bottom until it's 50, 60, 70, 100 feet from that fishing spot. And if anything, it just drugged the fish that were under the boat, that were going to bite your bait, away from your boat. So when you're offshore fishing, you got to make sure your chum's hitting the bottom at your fishing spot. You got to make sure your hooks and your baits are hitting the bottom where you want the fish to be. You don't put the boat on the spot, you put your baits on the spot. So if the current's running real strong, you want to stop your boat and make sure your boat's actually up current of that fishing spot. That way when your lines go back down to the bottom, your baits are at the fish. Same thing with the chum, guys. You want to make sure your chum's hitting those fish. So that's why I like those super shrimps, because it's a very hard, very quick sinking pellet. So that way when you're in 30, 40, 50, 60 foot of water targeting these hogfish, it's very easy to just toss them up current. And because they sink so fast, you know, you're confident they're going to hit your fishing spot. Not 20, 30 feet away from your fishing spot, pulling those fish away, you know. You got to kind of picture that when you're dropping your baits down, when you're dropping your chum down. You want to make sure your bait and your chum is all hitting your fishing spot, not dragging fish away from your fishing spot. Does anybody have any questions on hogfish techniques?
What size jig would you recommend starting out with?
The heavier the jig, the heavier the weight on the knocker rig, the heavier ball jig is going to be easier. The heavier the weight, the easier it is for you to feel that weight on the bottom. If you're using a super light weight and you're down on the bottom in 60, 70 foot of water, you have almost no tension on this line. So it's very difficult to feel that bite. If you're using a 3-ounce weight on the bottom, it's pretty easy to feel that 3-ounce weight. It's easier to keep your line tight enough to feel the bite, and it gives you a lot more ease of use. But also, a 3-ounce weight to a very leader-shy, very smart fish is going to be less enticing. So the lighter weight is definitely your preferred method because it's going to look more natural. You're going to get more bites, you're going to get more action, and you have a greater chance of catching that hogfish. But the heavier the weight, it's easier. So to answer your question, you have to find that happy medium for you. Generally, on our private charters, when we're targeting hogfish, we'll start out with 1-ounce egg sinkers on that knocker rig. And that knocker rig with a 1-ounce egg sinker, as that bait gets further from the 1 ounce, it still starts to descend a little slower. Then once you're at the bottom, the client can pull that egg sinker to the hook, and it's really easy to feel the bite. So that 1 ounce a knocker rig is a very heavy knocker rig, but it's real easy to use and it does give you some pretty good success. If you're a little bit more experienced, maybe try 3/4 ounce, or if you're really experienced, you can get away with a 1/2 ounce or even 1/4 ounce. But I was fishing the other day in about 70, 80 foot of water and I was using a 1/4 ounce and I missed a few fish because it was very difficult to feel the bite. But after a little bit of time, started dialing in on them, and we ended up catching some nice hogfish along with some big mangrove snapper too. But it is very difficult, especially when you get into deeper water using lighter weight. But it looks more natural. So it kind of depends on the bite. If you drop down a 1 ounce egg sinker and you're catching fish, why change it? It's easy for you to feel the bite. The fish don't mind, they're biting it. But if you're not catching those hogfish, or if the bite's really slow, you could switch down to a lighter weight. It's going to look more natural, you're going to have a greater chance to catch more fish, and you might end up getting that hogfish. But generally, you want to start out a little bit heavier, just like your tackle for hogfish. About 30-pound fluorocarbon is where I like to start. If the bite's a little slower, I might drop down to 20-pound. So generally start with the 30-pound fluorocarbon leader with a 1 ounce knocker rig. With a 4/0 J-hook is what I like using for those hogfish. And you generally want a much longer leader. This was tied in a hurry because we were filming a show the other day and I got broke off and the bite was good, so I tied it real quick. Generally for hogfish, you're going to use about 15 to 20 feet, even 25 feet of fluorocarbon because you want to make sure that super smart leader-shy fish doesn't see that braided line at all. You want to definitely use braided line because it gives you that greater sensitivity, but you want to use a very long fluorocarbon leader. That's what's going to give you that edge to try to hopefully catch that hogfish. You can get away with mono as well, but I prefer fluorocarbon when I'm going after those hogfish. Did I answer your question? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Hogfish, that is a very smart question. Hogfish are definitely attracted to different colors, some people believe. I think the most common hogfish colors are pink and green, and that's what I was told by the guy who makes the naked ball jigs. Pink and green are the hogfish's colors. A lot of naked ball jigs, a lot of the Chappie's ball jigs, a lot of the ball jigs and jig heads out in the market are pink and green for that reason. But I've also heard one of the lure guys say they always tell them that pink and green is the best for hogfish because those are the colors that don't sell. So I don't know. Myself, what I always go with, my rule of thumb, is I go with a more natural color. When I'm buying a lure or I'm buying jig heads or I'm buying anything like that, I'm using a more natural color. So for hogfish, I like going with white or like the orangish color because a white is going to mimic a crustacean on the bottom, either a crab or a sand flea. Sand fleas work well for a hogfish bait too. That orangish and pink color because shrimp a lot of times are that color as well. So just try to mimic their natural prey, and that's what I go with. A lot of lures, especially these inshore lures and these bass lures, they're made to catch fishermen walking down the aisle, not fish. So you got to kind of, what I always try to envision is what would that fish want to eat? What does his natural prey look like? Is it that pink, yellow, neon green color that's in the tackle shelf? Or is it that black and silver color, you know? Try to go a little bit more natural is my rule of thumb at least. Good question. Any other questions?
Is there anything you do to target the scamp?
Scamp grouper. Go deeper. Scamp grouper are generally a lot deeper, and generally when I catch scamp grouper, I'm targeting mangrove snapper. Because scamp grouper love the same tackle, and you can catch them really easily using the same methods as those mangrove snapper. So inside of 250, 300 foot of water, I would target scamp grouper the same way I target those mangrove snapper, which is just a double snell rig and that red fin plug, or a small pinfish works really well for scamp grouper. Also, a trick for scamp grouper, I don't have one in front of me, but a small diamond jig. One of those 2 to 4 ounce diamond jigs, you bouncing that right on the bottom, that seems to work really well for scamp grouper. they seem to really react well to vertical jigs right along the bottom. So for scamp grouper, either do everything you do for mangrove snapper or use a really light vertical jig bounced right along the bottom. And also, the deeper you go, the better. Typically, scamp grouper thrive and are more common anywhere from about 180, 200 foot of water out to about 300, 350 foot of water. That's where we catch a lot of the bigger scamp, even out to 450 foot. Those scamp grouper are definitely more of a deep water grouper species. We do catch them near shore as well, but they're more common the deeper you go, and they're bigger.
All the grouper is cold.
No, sir. In February and March, all the group are. Yes, yes. No, for example, his question was, what about the grouper in this February and March in this deep water closure? Again, they draw that line in the Gulf of Mexico. So our 39-hour, we can fish out where grouper are closed. Because a 39-hour, we leave at 3 p.m. Typically, they're most common on Fridays. So we leave 3 p.m. Friday. We start fishing around midnight, 1 a.m. Saturday morning. And that nighttime bite, from the time we start fishing until around sunrise, the snapper bite is best because those snapper feed more commonly at night. So during the nighttime, a lot of times we're going to start outside where grouper are closed because you don't catch a lot of those red grouper at night. Sometimes you see scamp grouper at night, but we start deeper where we can catch those mangroves, or we may start where you can't keep grouper too. Sometimes we fish a little bit everywhere, but you can start deeper, and then during the daytime when we're targeting red grouper and scamp grouper, we'll come inside that closure. Now the 39-hour trip fishes the middle grounds, elbow, and surrounding areas, and a large portion, if not the entire middle grounds, are not included in that closure area. So you can't keep grouper in the closure. In February and March when they have that 25 closure, you can still keep red grouper, scamp grouper, all those species inside the middle grounds. So we play the game, like I said. During the day, we fish inside. So once you have that grouper on in the box, you can't go beyond that closure line. So we'll fish inside. We'll fish the same areas we always fish in February, March to be able to keep grouper. To answer your question, we just can't go outside. Because sometimes in the spring, sometimes in the fall, sometimes in the summer, we'll go way deep on the 39-hour and fish way out west. Fish 180, 220 foot of water. And during February and March, where those grouper are closed beyond 20 fathoms, we wouldn't be able to do that. But it's not every time we do that anyway. Most of the trips are spent around the middle grounds, or east of the middle grounds, or south of the middle grounds, or in the Elbow. In those areas, we can't keep those grouper. Did I answer your question?
But now, Kayak and red grouper go in June and July.
No, red grouper is open up. Red snapper opens June 1st, and red snapper closes when the quota is met. So thing about red snapper, guys, is there's a commercial red snapper season, there's a federal for hire red snapper season, and then there's a private recreational red snapper season. And for private recreational red snapper, that season changes depending on which state you're landing those fish in. So, Florida, for example, last year in 2018, the private recreational season was 40 days, June 11th till 40 days after that, whenever that ended. The federal for-hire season was 51 days, June 1st to July 21st, I think. And then the commercial season was, they have their quota, their IFQ, and they're allowed to fill that IFQ whenever they see fit. Now, the private recreational season this year should be close to what it was in 2018. The private recreational season in 2018, again, was 40 days. So this year, I would imagine they're going to have 35 to 40 days. The private recreational anglers in 2018 overfished the quota by 13%. So you have a payback. So you're going to have a little less quota in 2019 than you did in 2018. But they've raised the total allowable catch for red snapper by 10%. So that means the 13% you overfished is going to be covered by that 10% increase. So you should have around 35 to 40 days for private recreational anglers if the FWC decides to do the same style season they did last year. For private recreational anglers, that is up to the FWC. That is a state FWC decision. For federal for-hire anglers, we're managed under the National Marine Fisheries. That's the Gulf Council. That's the federal fishery management law. And I go to all the Gulf Council meetings. And that's going to be that's pretty much already set. We know for a charter boat and party boat with federal permits, that season is going to open June 1st, guaranteed. And it's going to go until your quota is full. The specific number of pounds in that quota has not been set yet. That never gets set until around May 1st. But early estimations is we're going to have about 60 days. So for charter boats and party boats in the Gulf of Mexico with a federal permit, red snapper season should open June 1st, and it should run until at least July 26th, 27th, maybe even the end of July. Gag grouper are opening June 1st, they end December 31st, or until the quota is met. The big species that you have to watch out for that can change: red snapper, gag grouper, amberjack, gray triggerfish, and I blanked out for a minute. Gags, red triggerfish. I can't think. Amberjack, yeah. I said 5, right? Yeah, there you go. Those are the 5. Those 5 major species are those that you have to watch out for. Those are going to be the ones that change rapidly. Those gags, they've been pretty set though, so I would imagine you're going to have no problem with 6 months on those. The red snapper, if something crazy happens and they say we're landing them super fast, those can shorten up too. But this year, a federal for-hire boat, all my charter boats and party boats out on this Marina are federally permitted vessels. So we're all federal permitted, so we all have access to that 60-day approximate red snapper season. And they're all Coast Guard inspected vessels. And in 2019, every one of those boats has to have daily electronic reporting and vessel monitoring. So by the end of 2019, before I can touch a fish in my fish box, I have to send an electronic report of what I harvested and what I caught and released to the federal government. And I have to have a vessel monitoring system affixed to my vessel that tells the federal government every, between 10 minutes to 60 minutes where my vessel is located at all times, 365 days, 24 hours a day. So by the end of 2019, our federally permitted for-hire vessels are going to be super accountable with this daily electronic reporting and that vessel monitoring. So a lot of interesting stuff going on in the fisheries management side of things. But that's a whole nother seminar. Video monitoring is very, very common in certain fisheries. The highly migratory pelagic fishery, especially the long line boats, they're already required to have video monitoring. So they actually monitor where people fish, and you have to send that hard drive to the federal government when you land, when you come back to dock. In our fishery, that's not going to happen. That's not something being discussed currently. But we are doing a project with Marina, and they are going to be videoing our fish as they come up to study barotrauma. But that's specifically for barotrauma. It's nothing to do with the fishery. But that could be something that's being discussed for other fisheries. For example, striper fishing, a lot of commercial fishing. Commercial fishermen, a lot of guys, it kind of frustrates me. I'll hear people say, well, a red snapper season's so short because of the commercial guy. Those commercial guys, yes, they have a much larger quota. Yes, they can fish 365, but they have very, very strict rules. A commercial boat, for example, every long lining boat in the Gulf of Mexico has to have that video camera on their boat watching them fish. Also, they have to call the federal government 3 hours before they get back to the dock and say, hey, I'm going back to the dock at this time. I'm going to be at this dock, which has to be an approved dock by the National Marine Fisheries. And they have to tell them how many fish they have on board. So if a boarding officer comes down to the dock where they told them they're going to be, and that boat's not there, or that boat's there with a different amount of fish, they're going to jail, and they're going to get huge fines. So those commercial boats, and then that boarding officer is going to measure and weigh and take the otolith out of every fish that comes off that boat. So every fish that comes off a commercial vessel is measured, weighed, and has year data done. They know how old the fish is, they know the sex of the fish. So there's a ton of fishery management and a ton of fishery science that comes from the commercial fleet. And they're 100%, every ounce of fish that comes onto a commercial boat and is sold is accounted for. To the T with paperwork. It's ridiculous. I've watched commercial boats unload at our dock. They're doing about 2 or 3 times a week. And it takes almost 6 hours for the commercial IFQ owner to sign all the paperwork. Even if it's just a couple 100 pounds of fish. It's ridiculous, the paperwork they go through. So they are very accountable, and that's why they have that IFQ system. So our system's a little different because you and I, we don't care about pounds of fish. We want the opportunity to catch fish, right? You want longer seasons so you have that opportunity to catch fish, right? So our fishery management is completely different for that reason. But I don't want to get too far into that. Go down the rabbit hole quick. Yeah, nearshore trolling. Right now you can catch not too much nearshore trolling, but coming up in spring when those mackerel start showing back up, nearshore trolling is awesome. All the way through the summertime, you can still catch mackerel and kingfish in the summer too, but they're most common in the spring and fall. Now water temperatures like 72 to about 78 degrees, that's when we get those kingfish and mackerel nearshore. Generally anywhere from about 2 to 3 knots, upwards of about 12 knots, you can catch kingfish and mackerel. The most common is anywhere from about 6 to about 9 knots. That's the most common trolling speed. The difficulty is what kind of boat you have, what kind of motors do you have, how can you accomplish that trolling speed, that trolling speed, and what lures do you want to use to make sure that you have that good looking spread. The most common thing trolling nearshore is those planers and spoons. When I'm trolling inside of about 20-30 miles from shore, a planer and spoon is the most common method. You put about 15 to 18 feet between this trolling spoon and this planer, and you have a very good chance at catching plenty of those kingfish and mackerel. Let's see if I got one unrigged around here. Cheryl, can I open this?
Absolutely.
So these planers, how this works is you put a snap swivel on the back of this planer and you tie your leader to your spoon on the back of this planer. And then this little ring gets attached to your main line. And this is basically the same idea as an airplane wing. You put your spoon out, your spoon is attached to the back side of this with the snap swivel, you let this go out, and then once you're ready to set this planer, typically when you're using a planer and spoon, you're using at least a 4/0 reel, if not a little bit larger. On our boats, you must use at least the 9/0 reel because we're not going to slow down to reel in a little kingfish or mackerel. You got to reel in it while the boat's moving. On your smaller boats, typically you're going to use the lightest possible reel because you want to be able to have a lot of fun reeling in that fish and you can slow down to retrieve it. So this would be a common kingfish and mackerel reel near shore if you're on a smaller pleasure boat. So what you do to set this out is you hold your rod, point your rod tip right at the planer, and this planer goes out the back of the boat until it's at the point where you're ready to set it. When you're at the point you're ready to set it, all you do is lift your rod tip up real slowly and then drop your rod tip real slowly. And what that does is that sends a shot of slack down the line. And that planer is getting dragged by that spoon behind it, that 15 to 18 feet behind it, and your main line's attached to this ring. When you drop your rod tip real slowly from the sky, this ring shoots up to the top there, and it creates what I was talking about before, that airplane effect. And it creates down drag. So all of a sudden, this planer then drags your spoon behind it down to the bottom, or closer to the bottom. The idea with the number of the planer, this is a number 3 planer, which is pretty large. I typically use number 1 or number 2 planers. Number 3 is a very large planer. It's going to bring your bait further to the bottom. The higher the number, the larger the size of the planer, the deeper it's going to go. So these planers are really easy because when it's set, and it's dragging your bait down to the bottom, your rod tip's way bent over, and when you get a fish on, the fish is gonna pull on that spoon, which is tied to the back here. So when it pulls on that spoon, what happens? It pulls it back up and it trips the planer. And then the planer brings that bait, that spoon, and that fish right back to the surface. So it's a really, really cool method because it drags your bait down to the bottom. When you get the fish, it drags the fish right back to the surface. So you're gonna notice when you set that planer out, again, you lift your rod tip up to the sky, drop it down real quick, then all of a sudden the planer sets and your rod tip's way bent over. And when your rod tip's way bent over, you know the planer's working right. And then you're gonna see when you catch a fish, because your rod tip's gonna go from bent over, it's gonna snap back up like you broke off. And then it's gonna go back down a lot less bent. Typically, when you're trolling a rod like this, it's gonna be bent like this. When you catch a fish, it's literally gonna snap up and then go back a little less bent. That's how you know that you've got that mackerel in there. It's really easy. I grew up doing it all the time with my dad. It's a great way in the spring and fall. You can literally go out there in a 10-foot boat and troll the crab traps a mile from the beach with this method and catch a ton of mackerel and kingfish. It's great for the kids, it's great for the family, it's fun to do, it's easy to do, and it's a great way to learn how to kind of mackerel and kingfish. And then the more advanced method, stepping up from that kingfish and spoon method, is using something like these Rapala extracts. Now this is a much larger one than you would be using Nearshore. This is a Rapala extract Magnum 30. This is actually 40. They make a 30 and then they make a 20 and a 10 as well. Typically the 20 is about the smallest I would troll. The thing about these is those planers and spoons, you control those upwards of 9 knots. There's no real upper speed limit to those because the faster you go, the deeper the planer goes. These lipped plugs can't troll that fast. Once you're over about 8, 9 knots, they don't like